Hi, everyone. Greetings from Madison, Wisconsin, in the United States. I regret that I'm not able to be there in person with you in Vienna, and hope you're all having a great time. I'm here today to speak with you about building culturally adapted data sets for global conversational AI or multilingual conversational AI. My name is Aaron Schliem, and I am a senior solutions architect at WeLocalize, specializing in AI solutions. At WeLocalize, we work with some of the largest tech companies in the world to build data sets that help support product development for those companies. We do more than conversational AI, but in this case, I'm going to talk to you specifically about some of what we've learned about building really strong data sets that cover a wide range of culture. A big part of our approach is the use of natural language processing, or NLP, to help us to develop good workflows and good quality assurance methodologies to ensure that we're hitting the mark in terms of cultural diversity. Before we dive into some of the details on how we do this, I thought it would be useful to start with a broader perspective related to how humans perceive reality and how machines perceive reality, and how this plays out then as we're trying to build a culturally adapted AI. Humans apply a wide range of inferences, prejudices, judgments to how we perceive things. So, for example, if I were to tell you that I am a gay American father, there's a lot of implicit assumptions there. So you may have an idea of what it means to be gay, what it means to be a man or a father, what it means to be American. And you and I may share those perceptions, or we may not, but generally we will understand each other because we have a wide range of experiences that help inform how we perceive these realities as they're communicated. Machines, on the other hand, don't have those experiences. Machines are very limited. They're limited to the data that they are processing. So for machines, this reality is an explicit one. It is not inferred. And if we're going to develop a culturally adapted kind of AI, we're going to need to give it lots of culturally rich data so that those explicit references can be portrayed in the actual AI performance. So thinking more about what goes into AI data, I thought it would be useful to think through a few basic concepts and then think about how we can apply culture to these. First off, let's think about domain or subject matter area. So within that, there's something called an intent. So as you may imagine, an intent is something that you want to do, but it's specific to a domain. So let's imagine that if the subject matter domain is banking, an intent might be wanting to open up a bank account. So again, an intent is specific to a domain. It's not just a general desire. It's something you want to do in a particular domain. Slots are key kinds of information that you might convey or that an AI algorithm might ask you for in order to complete your intent. So for example, if I want to open a bank account, a slot might be the account type. So I may need to say, do I want to open a checking account or do I want to open a savings account? Lexicon is another aspect of domain in the sense that the lexicon is the set of words and terms that are commonly used when interacting or transacting in a particular subject matter domain. So again, if this were banking, we might use words like account, routing, balance, finance, checking, savings, etc. All of these things go into building out a domain-specific conversational AI engine. Another piece of the puzzle is prompts. So typically when humans are helping us to create data that's going to train the AI engine, we need to give them a prompt or something from which they will then derive some natural language expression. This doesn't matter if it is a verbal generation, so somebody says something and it is recorded, or if it is a written version of those same kinds of utterances. The scenario is a prose description of a domain-specific intent. So positioning me psychologically to be able to produce the kind of data that is representative of the kinds of things that humans would say. Utterances is another component of AI data. And largely utterances is the core currency that is used to train an AI, a conversational AI engine. First, we would have carrier phrases. So carrier phrases can be somewhat generic. They're the phrases that surround all of the key information. So they're things like, I would like to, I really feel like doing something. Could you help me to, etc. So the ways that we essentially carry the important information about intents and slots so that the machine can understand us coherently from a grammatical perspective. Slot values is then what is inserted in these carrier phrases. So you remember before we talked about slots, it's key types of information. The slot value is the information. So maybe the slot value was account type, but in my utterance, I would actually include a specific thing like checking account. So to combine carrier phrase and slot value, I might say, I want to open a checking account. The last piece here is fillers, or non-informational words and sounds. And this is another part of making good AI and also making culturally adapted AI. Not every human being uses sound in the same way. So fillers are things like, I guess, the things that we all use in our day-to-day discourse, but that are not necessarily the core information that we're trying to convey. So taking these basics of AI, let's move ahead and think a little bit further about, some dimensions of culture, because ultimately we want to reflect these dimensions of culture in the data sets that we're building. So some of the key dimensions that are worth considering when you're building AI data sets are, first of all, colloquialisms, texting, and abbreviations. So here we're thinking about non-standard, non-intellectual, non-academic language, just real language that people use on an everyday basis, including when they talk to their smartphones or to their computers or their assisted devices. An example of this would be, in Australia, the word arvo is used rather than afternoon as an abbreviation. I'd never heard of this, but certainly it's commonplace in Australia. And we would definitely want to represent words like arvo in the data set so that then the artificial intelligence that we're building can also understand that word that is commonplace in a culture like Australian culture. If we're working on an engine that is built for text parsing, you might need to be able to parse text abbreviations, which are really commonplace these days when people interact with chatbots, for example. Another dimension of culture is regulatory regimes. So a good example of this might be, let's say that we're talking about the insurance domain. You might need to take into consideration what kinds of insurance do people actually need in a particular culture, in a particular country. So where I live in the United States, it is a requirement that we must have auto insurance, car insurance. So that's going to be a very commonplace intent, is opening up a car insurance policy. But there might be an even more specific intent that is opening up a car insurance policy that is compliant with the minimum requirements in my market. So this is how culture starts to play a role in defining what we actually want, because it defines what we need by virtue of the regulatory regime. There can be things like local customs. What are the commonplace things that people do? So for example, in Japan, it's not uncommon to send your luggage ahead of you. That's not something that is common in American culture, but it might be something that if I'm Japanese, I would choose to ask of a hotel or of a travel service. Another dimension that's important to think about are local brands and product categories. So typically, even though we do live in a globalized world, where we all, consume products, built by and distributed by really large companies all over the world, there's still a very local focus for a lot of what we do. So, think of your local bank or insurance agencies or healthcare providers. So local brands are important. They need to be a part of the data set so that, again, the AI can see them and perceive them as a part of that experience for the person using the AI. Product categories are important as well. So, for example, where I live, everybody owns a snow shovel. Everybody owns ice scrapers for their cars to remove the ice from the windshields. That may not be relevant in another place, another location where it's only hot weather and there's never snow. Whereas there might be, a need in the south of France to buy a parasol because the heat of the sun is so extraordinary. So again, you need to think about the local reality and the kinds of products that are sold there, so that then, if you imagine a retail domain, it can include words that are important to that cultural reality. Institutional infrastructure is another important consideration. So imagine that, where I live, there is both private insurance and public health insurance. But if you live in a location where perhaps there is no public health insurance, or more likely, there's only private health insurance and no private, there's only public health insurance and no private health insurance, you may find that it is confusing or unnecessary to produce a lot of data related to private health insurance, because it simply is not a reality in a particular market. So this is an example of institutional infrastructure. Another good example is just preferences, food preferences. Where I live, cranberries are very common. It's a commonplace dish and people eat it all the time. Whereas if I'm in Central America, chayote is a very common kind of, I'm not quite sure if it's a fruit or a vegetable, but it's a common food that might be a part of an inquiry that I'd like to make to a restaurant, for example. So again, we want to infuse the data with real life, the kinds of things that real people care about. And those things get reflected then in the lexicon, in the intents, the prompts, the slots, and the slot values that we just looked at. So how do we do this? How do we build culture into the data sets? First of all, we want to look at how we design the tasks themselves. So typically, we gather data for AI by asking a wide range of different kinds of people to log into a system and to generate data for us. But a lot can be done to maximize the success of those people and to maximize the probability that they will reflect important cultural dynamics in the data that they are delivering to us. So one idea is to maximize the locale contextualization. So when I write a prompt for somebody to give us data, I want to do so in a way that thinks about their locale and makes an assumption about where they sit right now in their local reality. So for example, I might write a prompt that says, imagine that it's snowing and you want to buy a shovel. That immediately places me in the reality of my culture, and it helps me then to generate examples of sentences that I might produce naturally to request a shovel. Number two there is starting with easy domains and intents. It's not easy for people to imagine what they might do in a given scenario, and in particular to imagine a very diverse range of sentence structures that they might use. So if you start with easier content, it's easier for the workers to start to understand what you're looking for, build their skills to perform this kind of linguistic acrobatics, is what I would call it, and then move them forward into more complex intents and domains. Simplifying the user experience is important. If a worker is too focused on a complex user interface or too many steps in a process, that can detract from their ability to really focus on the subject matter itself and on the way that they're deploying language, which is ultimately what we want. We can infuse prompts with diversity. So imagine that we want to have greater gender diversity in the data sets. Well, we may choose to reflect that kind of diversity in the way that we ask for the data by using a variety of different gendered people in those examples. Another technique for ensuring better cultural coverage through task design is just thinking about how many examples you expect from each individual contributor. Each of us is limited by our own life experiences and our cultural experiences, and so you can't expect one person to create such a vast array of culturally reflective content. So it's important to limit what each person can contribute to the total data set. And then finally, using NLP, natural language processing, as a validation tool. When you're working at scale, and again, conversational AI, as all AI, does require relatively large volumes of data in order to produce good algorithms. Using NLP can be really helpful because checking at a very micro level for what is in the content that your workforce is delivering can be really tedious and challenging, whereas NLP helps us do that at scale. So a couple more ideas on how we go about producing really high quality, high diversity data. The next thing I want to focus on is the idea of where we source and how we source data workers. And this is a really important question because ultimately the workers are going to be the lens through which their individual cultural experiences shine, and that diversity of experience shines. So I've thought of a few don't do and do kinds of examples that hopefully will help you to think through potential techniques that you might deploy on your side. The first one is, don't look for subject matter specialists the way that one might look for a subject matter specialist for translation. Rather, look for people who have consumer or user experience. You want somebody who has used a chatbot from their local fast food place. That matters way more than being an expert in how a fast food organization runs. Again, we want user experience, not expertise in the subject matter. Use vocal targeting, vocal register targeting, high voice, low voice, medium voice, rather than gender targeting. Again, when we use gender targeting, we can often lead to bias in the way that we're sourcing data and really not necessarily give us what the machine needs, which is a wide range of pitch. Another technique for sourcing a diverse data workforce is thinking about tech experience rather than age targeting. So here, what we care about is users with different amounts of experience will interface with a machine in different ways. My grandmother, who may not have very much experience, will produce sentences that are different than my daughter. So think about tech experience and getting a wide range of those experiences rather than making an assumption that somebody of a certain age does or does not have the right skill set and experience to produce diverse data. And the last area that I wanted to talk about was code switching and bilingualism. This is a really important and complex phenomenon in conversational AI. And think about cases in the United States, for example. My children speak both English and Spanish, and they may switch back and forth between the two of them in a rather fluid way when they are talking. But it's easy to force it, right? So when we're developing data sets, we want to have code switching, reflections of bilingualism, but we don't want it to be forced. So one way that you can do that is through imaginative contextualization. So again, writing prompts that place someone in a mental frame of reference that might solicit or elicit from them a code switching utterance. So we want to promote, but without forcing somebody to perform for us. Another way to think about getting natural sounding code switching is to say it out loud rather than writing it. Often when we write things first, it becomes stilted and unnatural. Whereas if you have somebody who's a naturally bilingual person and allow them to say something out loud first, see how it flows off the tongue, and then write it down, that can produce a lot more natural data that is reflective of true use of code switching and in a conversational setting. And the last piece is, if you are indeed writing it down, it's important to enforce the script usage. So let's imagine you're working in Hindi and in English. it is important to make some decisions about how you're going to write the words in English. Are you going to write them in Latin characters, or are you going to transliterate them in Hindi characters? It's important to have a structure and that your workforce learn and abide by that. Otherwise, parsing the multiple languages can be quite challenging. I hope this has been a useful introduction to thinking about diversity and culture and how it's reflected in AI data sets. I'm happy to talk further if any of you wants to extend the conversation. Again, I'm sorry I'm not there, but please do feel free to reach out to me at my email address, which is on screen. You can also look me up on LinkedIn. I believe it's on my speaker profile on the event website. And I hope you all have a really great rest of your conference and look forward to speaking with you soon. Take care.